The bow was already raised when Lucas stepped into the light. Two dogs were tied side by side, bodies trembling, breath shallow. Behind them, stone walls. In front of them, an arrow. The crowd expected shouting. They expected violence. Instead, the man stood still. The wealthy host kept talking about discipline, about fear, about why power must hurt to be respected.
The time has come to make a
and
decision.
somewhere in the quiet,
and there is
a camera
nowhere
watched.
left to hide.
Not to accuse,
Yes, exactly.
not to interrupt, but to remember. When the arrow stopped moving, the truth had already been seen. And for the first time, the hill had nowhere left to hide.
No, you will.
Hollow Creek lay beneath a clear early autumn sky, the air cool and steady as the small American town settled into an evening that appeared calm, orderly, and unchanged by the slow drift of clouds above it. At the highest point of the hill stood the stone mansion, pale and imposing, its walls thick with age and intention. Built decades earlier by a family that believed wealth should outlast generations, the house had been restored rather than softened, its sharp lines preserved, its presence unmistakable. From below, it looked less like a residence and more like a statement, something that did not belong to the town so much as overlook it. Tonight, every window glowed. Lanterns traced the long drive in warm arcs of light, guiding arriving cars toward iron gates that opened without hesitation. The house belonged to Richard Halston. Richard Halston was a man in his early 60s, tall and spare, his posture straight and economical, as though excess movement were a waste. His silver hair was combed back neatly, his expression composed and distant. He wore a tailored dark suit that carried no visible branding, only the quiet assurance of expense. In public, he was known as a successful investor and a generous patron of Hollow Creek, his name attached to renovated buildings and charitable events. In private, he valued control above affection, believing order to be the only reliable defense against loss. Grief had once passed through his life and never fully left. It had not softened him, only narrowed his focus. Inside the mansion, the evening unfolded with deliberate elegance. Crystal glasses chimed softly. Conversations flowed in measured tones, punctuated by practiced laughter. Guests moved from the marble hall to the terrace, admiring the view of the town below, as though it were a painting meant to be appreciated from a distance. Music drifted from hidden speakers, classical and unobtrusive, filling the spaces between voices rather than interrupting them. The house was doing what it was designed to do, impress without revealing anything of itself. Moving quietly among the guests was Sarah Whitmore, a woman in her early 60s, tall and slender, with iron-gray hair pulled into a low, careful bun. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture straight, her movements precise. Sarah had worked in the mansion for many years, long enough to remember when the walls had first been cleaned stone by stone after the last renovation. She spoke politely when spoken to, anticipated needs before they were voiced, and kept her opinions to herself. Long ago, she had learned that in houses like this, attention was a currency best spent sparingly. A single incident early in her tenure, intervening on behalf of a younger staff member who had been struck during an argument, had taught her what compassion cost. Since then, she watched more than she spoke and remembered more than she revealed. As dusk deepened into night, the mansion's lights grew brighter, visible from nearly every corner of Hollow Creek. Below the hill, the town lived a quieter version of the same hour. Shops closed their doors. Porch lights blinked on. Cars passed through the main street without urgency. It was the kind of place where people recognized each other by routine rather than name. Near the edge of town, in a small rental house with peeling paint and a porch that creaked when stepped upon, Lucas Reed sat at a narrow kitchen table, a single lamp casting a warm circle over worn wood. The house smelled faintly of old varnish and coffee. It was not a place meant to impress anyone. It was a place meant to be left alone. Lucas was in his mid-30s, broad-shouldered and lean, his build shaped by years of disciplined training rather than display. His dark hair was cut short, practical, and a neatly kept beard framed a face marked by restraint. A pale scar near his right temple caught the light when he turned his head, an old injury that required no explanation. He wore faded jeans, a long-sleeve shirt softened by use, and boots that had seen long miles. His posture was relaxed but alert, the posture of someone who had learned to rest without ever fully lowering his guard. He had served as a Navy SEAL for more than a decade. The work had demanded clarity, loyalty, and the ability to act without hesitation. Leaving it behind had demanded something harder. The quiet afterward had been the most difficult adjustment of all. Lucas did not speak much about his past, not because it was secret, but because it was complete. What remained was a quieter commitment, to notice what others missed, and to respond when it mattered. At his feet lay his dog, a German shepherd named Ranger, 5 years old, black and tan, athletic even in rest. His coat was thick and glossy where the lamplight touched it, his ears sharp and attentive. Ranger's eyes were a steady brown, intelligent and calm. He was not a dog that startled easily. He watched first, then decided. Lucas had found him at a shelter during a winter when everything else had fallen apart. Since then, Ranger had become more than a companion. He was routine, responsibility, and presence. A living reminder that silence did not have to mean isolation. Lucas finished his coffee and set the mug aside. He listened to the house settle around him, the quiet clicks and sighs of cooling pipes. Through the back window, he could see the distant glow of the mansion on the hill. The lights formed a soft crown against the dark sky, beautiful in a way that felt impersonal. Lucas had worked security shifts near that property before. He knew the fences, the gates, the way the road curved as it climbed. He did not think about the man who owned it. Wealth did not interest him. Neither did resentment. What mattered was what people chose to do when no one forced their hand. Back on the hill, Richard Halston stood near the terrace doors, glass in hand, surveying his guests with composed satisfaction. He listened more than he spoke, allowing others to fill the space with admiration and speculation. When he did speak, his words were precise, controlled, never wasted. Sarah noticed, as she always did, how the evening moved according to his presence, how conversations shifted subtly when he entered or left a room. It was not affection that drew people toward him. It was gravity. As the night matured, the house continued to glow, its light spilling down the slope toward the town. Below, Lucas stepped onto his porch, the cool air settling against his skin. Ranger followed, standing close, his body relaxed but attentive. From here, the hill looked distant, almost unreal, like a separate world perched above the one Lucas knew. Two lives moving in parallel, separated by elevation and intention. The backgrounds of the mansion existed beyond comfort and explanation. Past the trimmed hedges and the polite glow of the terrace, an older stone outbuilding stood alone, its purpose private, its presence intentional. Lantern light marked its edges. Everything else was shadow. Richard Halston brought his chosen guests there without ceremony. They followed because they always did. No one asked why the gathering had moved away from music and glass. Curiosity outweighed caution. Trust filled the silence where questions should have lived. The dog was already there. He was a retired K-9, once trained for precision and obedience, now reduced to stillness. His body showed age, but not weakness. Dark fur streaked with gray clung to a frame shaped by years of service. A small notch in one ear marked a past that had never been gentle. His amber eyes tracked the space with disciplined alertness, searching for order where none existed. The wooden frame stood against the far wall. Rope held him there, firm and final. He did not fight. Training held him upright even when instinct demanded flight. His breath was fast but controlled, chest pressing against restraint. The guests gathered loosely. Wine glasses reflected lantern light. A few smiles tightened. Someone whispered. No one left. Sarah Whitmore stood apart from them, close enough to see clearly, far enough to remain unnoticed. She was tall, slender, iron-gray hair pinned cleanly at the nape of her neck. Years of service had taught her how to disappear while watching everything. She had learned silence the hard way, after speaking once when she should not have. Since then, she had survived by remembering instead of reacting. Halston took the bow. It was well made, plain, maintained. He handled it without hurry. The movement drew attention, conversation thinned, the space sharpened, the arrow flew. The sound of impact was immediate and wrong. The dog's body jerked hard against the frame. The cry that tore from him was raw, uncontrolled, stripped of restraint. It cut through the outbuilding, ricocheted off stone, and escaped into the open space beyond. For a brief second, the group froze. Then release came. Applause from a few, laughter from others. Relief disguised as approval. Halston stepped closer, assessing the wound without expression. Satisfaction did not require a smile. The dog trembled. Blood darkened his fur. His breathing broke into shallow pulls. His eyes searched the gathered faces, not for mercy, but for familiarity. There was none. Understanding arrived without words. Halston reached for another arrow. The dog's whine rose again, higher now, stretched thin by pain and confusion. It was not loud, but it carried. The sound slipped past stone and wood, through hedges and iron fencing, and moved downhill unchallenged. It reached the town. Hollow Creek received it in fragments. The cry threaded through quiet streets, past shuttered shops and dim porches, and entered a small rental house near the edge of town through an open window. Inside, a German shepherd lifted his head. Ranger was 5 years old, black and tan, built for endurance rather than show. His ears snapped forward, his body tensed instantly. He rose without hesitation, moving toward the door with focused urgency. A low sound formed in his chest, controlled but insistent. Lucas Reed looked up. Lucas did not hear the cry clearly at first. What he noticed was Ranger's reaction. Years of working with trained dogs had taught him that behavior preceded understanding. He listened. The sound came again, faint but unmistakable. Recognition settled fast. That was not a stray. That was a working animal in pain. Lucas stood. The chair scraped once and was forgotten. Ranger looked back at him briefly, then fixed his gaze forward. The hill was visible in the distance, its light steady, detached. Back behind the mansion, Halston raised the second arrow. The guests leaned in. Anticipation sharpened. Sarah felt her throat tighten, but she did not move. She had learned how quickly movement could become consequence. The dog cried out again. The sound traveled once more, thinner now, but still alive. It found ears that knew it. It found a man who still listened. Ranger was on his feet before Lucas understood why. The German shepherd moved in a single fluid motion, ears locked forward, body tense with purpose. There was no bark, no hesitation, just alignment. Lucas had learned long ago that when a trained dog reacted like that, explanation came later. He stood as the sound reached them again, thinner now, stretched by distance and pain, but unmistakable in its origin. It was not random noise. It carried structure inside it. It carried history. Lucas felt the recognition settle instantly. That cry belonged to a life that had once served humans and was now being broken by them. Lucas did not speak. He reached for his jacket and the keys by the door, movements stripped of doubt. Ranger did not wait. He was already moving, nails striking the floor once before the door opened. Outside, the road climbed sharply toward the hill, winding between stone walls and hedges, trimmed into quiet obedience. Lucas followed his dog without checking the time, without weighing consequence. His body remembered urgency, even after years of silence. The sound came again as they started up the incline, fainter but closer, confirming direction. Ranger adjusted his pace instinctively, leading without looking back. They ran together, man and dog, pulled uphill by something neither of them needed explained. Inside the mansion, Emily Carter stood still in the corridor that led away from the gathering. She was the senior house manager, a woman in her late 50s with a straight posture and carefully controlled expression. Her dark blonde hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to hold her thoughts in place. For years, Emily had managed the house through precision and restraint. She knew every schedule, every closed door, every rule that kept the estate running smoothly. She had survived by staying quiet, by convincing herself that order was not cruelty and that silence was not consent. The sound reached her again, slipping through the walls where music and laughter could not fully contain it. This time she did not rationalize it away. She recognized it for what it was, not fear alone, but training unraveling under pain. Something shifted inside her, not dramatically, but finally. The line she had guarded for years had been crossed. Whatever she had ignored before, whatever she had explained away for the sake of stability, no longer fit. Emily turned toward the back of the house, her steps measured, her mind clear in a way it had not been for a long time. She understood with a quiet certainty that what was happening was no longer something she could survive by silence alone. Lucas crossed the threshold of the old stable at the exact moment the second arrow was drawn. The space was small enough that nothing could be hidden once he stepped into the lantern light. Stone walls, packed earth, the wooden frame, the restrained body of the injured K9, and Richard Halston standing with the bow half raised all existed in the same breath. There was no warning shout, no demand. Lucas moved with the economy of someone trained to end danger before it finished forming. His shoulder drove into Halston's center of mass, precise and controlled, breaking balance rather than bone. The bow veered sideways as Halston hit the ground hard, stone scraping beneath him, surprise flashing across his face before anger could take its place. Ranger surged forward instantly. The German shepherd did not go for flesh. He went for function. His jaws closed around the grip of the bow with practiced certainty. Wood cracked under pressure. The sound was sharp and final, louder than the music drifting faintly from the main house. The broken pieces fell uselessly to the ground as Ranger backed away, body low, eyes locked, ready but restrained. The stable froze. Guests stood motionless, glasses suspended halfway to mouths, expressions stripped of amusement. Shock replaced indulgence. No one spoke, no one laughed. The sudden absence of control unsettled them more than the violence itself. Sarah Whitmore stood near the far wall, tall and rigid, her face pale but composed. Years of managing chaos quietly had prepared her for moments like this, though she had never expected to witness one so openly. She took in the scene with careful attention, noting who stood where, who looked away, who stared too long. Richard Halston recovered quickly. He pushed himself up from the stone floor with sharp movements, fury tightening his features. His voice came out controlled, but loud enough to command the room. He did not address Lucas directly. He did not need to. He called for security. He called for order. He spoke as though the interruption were an inconvenience rather than an exposure. The injured K9 sagged against the ropes, legs trembling, breath shallow. Lucas moved to him without hesitation. His hands were steady as he assessed the damage. Blood soaked into the fur, dark and warm. The dog's eyes flickered toward him, confusion giving way to something else. Recognition. Lucas worked quickly, cutting rope with force rather than finesse. Ranger pressed close, offering his body as support, a low sound vibrating from his chest, controlled and reassuring. Around them, the guests began to shift. Phones appeared, then disappeared just as quickly when a sharp command cut through the air. One by one, screens went dark. Someone reached for a wall panel. Lights dimmed slightly. The subtle hum of recording equipment fell silent. The estate knew how to protect itself. Emily Carter stood near the open doorway, watching the machinery of power engage. She was tall, composed, her posture straight despite the tension pulling through her shoulders. For years, she had managed events by anticipating needs and smoothing transitions. Now she watched a different process unfold. Damage control. Narrative control. She saw which cameras were shut off first. She saw which guests were quietly ushered away from certain angles. She understood with clarity that burned how easily truth could be redirected. Security arrived in a rush of dark suits and rehearsed authority. They did not rush Lucas. They formed a barrier instead, bodies positioned between him and the guests. Halston spoke calmly now, anger refined into accusation. Trespassing, assault, endangerment. His words fell into place quickly, practiced, ready. The story was already being written. Lucas did not argue. He did not shout. He lifted the injured dog carefully, mindful of the wound, weight settling heavily into his arms. The dog let out a weak sound, then went still, trusting. Ranger stayed close, head low, eyes tracking movement around them. As Lucas turned to leave, he felt the shift in the room. The silence hardened into hostility. Guests watched with narrowed eyes, their discomfort transforming into judgment. He was no longer an interrupter. He was a threat to the order they depended on. The gates were open just long enough to let him pass. Outside the stable, the mansion loomed unchanged, its windows still glowing warmly, its stone walls indifferent. Gravel crunched under Lucas's boots as he moved with purpose away from the light. Behind him, the gates closed again, metal sliding into place with mechanical certainty. The separation was immediate. What happened inside would be contained. What happened outside would be questioned. Emily remained at the doorway, hands clasped tightly, watching Lucas disappear down the path. She did not follow. She did not speak, but she remembered everything. Sarah shifted slightly beside her, meeting her gaze for a brief moment. There was no comfort in it, only acknowledgement. Lucas did not look back. He adjusted his grip on the wounded dog, Ranger pacing at his side, alert and silent. The weight in his arms was real. The looks that followed him were real. The cost of what he had done had already begun to take shape, even if he did not yet know its full measure. Morning did not arrive gently for Lucas. It arrived in fragments, carried by a phone call he had expected and still felt unprepared to receive. The voice on the other end was polite, measured, trained to sound neutral. There had been a complaint, a report filed overnight, allegations of trespassing and assault on private property. Lucas listened without interruption, his gaze fixed on the injured canine resting on blankets beside the couch. The dog's breathing was shallow but steady, eyes half closed, body held together by pain medication and trust. Ranger lay nearby, alert and silent, watching Lucas more than the room. By mid-morning, the consequences began to stack with quiet efficiency. The security contractor Lucas worked for did not accuse him outright. They did not need to. Pending investigation, his night shifts were suspended indefinitely. The supervisor delivering the news was a man Lucas barely knew, mid-40s, thinning hair, careful voice. He spoke about liability and optics, about how things looked from the outside. He avoided eye contact. The call ended with a rehearsed apology and no promise of return. Lucas set the phone down slowly. He had learned long ago that systems rarely raised their voices when removing someone. They simply stepped back and let gravity do the rest. The landlord's message arrived shortly after. It was brief, formal, citing clauses Lucas had skimmed years earlier and never expected to matter. Concerns had been raised. Disturbances, risk. The words were impersonal, but the meaning was clear. 30 days. Lucas folded the notice and set it on the table. He did not look at it again. His attention returned to the dog, whose chest rose and fell with careful effort. Survival came first. Everything else followed. At the estate, Richard Halston's morning unfolded differently. The outbuilding had been cleaned, the frame dismantled, the ground swept. By the time sunlight reached the stone walls, nothing remained that suggested disruption. Inside the house, conversations were already being reframed. The story moved quickly, carried by confident voices and selective memory. A dangerous intruder, an unprovoked attack, a theft of property under the guise of heroism. Halston did not repeat himself. He did not need to. Others did it for him. The lawyer arrived just before noon. Nathan Cole was tall and lean, early 40s, with dark hair combed back and a narrow face that settled naturally into a polite smile. His suit fit perfectly, uncreased, as though discomfort had never touched it. His eyes were sharp, observant, missing nothing while appearing to notice little. He had built a career navigating disputes for people who preferred to remain untouched by them. When he spoke, his voice was calm, precise, never raised. Authority did not require volume. Cole visited Lucas's house in person. He stood on the porch without sitting, briefcase in hand, posture relaxed but deliberate. He spoke about misunderstandings, about private property, about escalation. He framed the injured K9 as an asset, legally owned, unlawfully removed. During the investigation, he explained, the dog would need to be returned to the estate for its own protection. The phrase landed with practiced ease. Then came the second condition. For security reasons, Cole said, Halston required assurance that there would be no further interference. Lucas's German Shepherd would be temporarily housed on the estate as part of that assurance. Not a seizure, a precaution. Cole smiled slightly as he spoke, as if offering a compromise rather than issuing a demand. He slid the document forward. The paper was clean. The language was airtight. Lucas did not sign. He listened. He asked one question about the dog's medical treatment. Cole answered smoothly. Lucas nodded once. He said he needed time. The lawyer did not argue. He did not threaten. He closed the briefcase and reminded Lucas of the timeline. Courtesy, he added, was extended only so far. After Cole left, the house felt smaller. Ranger paced once, sensing the shift, then returned to Lucas's side. The injured dog stirred, eyes opening briefly, then closing again. Lucas sat at the table, the document spread before him, sunlight cutting across their edges. He understood the shape of what he faced. Not a man. A system designed to smooth harm into legality. Across town, Emily Carter began making quiet calls. She did not start with accusations. She started with memory. She reached out to former staff members whose numbers she had never deleted. People who had left suddenly. People who had never given notice. She spoke carefully, her voice steady, asking how they were doing, whether they had landed somewhere safe. At first, the conversation stayed shallow. Then a pause would stretch. A breath would be taken. A detail offered. A shove in a hallway. A threat delivered with a smile. A dog kicked for barking too long. Each story arrived incomplete, cautious, but together they began to align. Sarah Whitmore was the last Emily approached. Sarah listened without interruption. When Emily finished speaking, there was a long silence. Then Sarah said quietly that she remembered more than she had ever written down. She described patterns, timing, who was present and who was sent away. She spoke of the night she had stopped intervening, not because she had stopped caring, but because caring had proven dangerous. Emily listened. She did not interrupt. She wrote nothing. She remembered. Back at Lucas's house, the veterinarian called. The injured K9 would recover with rest, she said, voice professional but kind. The arrow had missed anything vital. The dog was lucky. Lucas thanked her. Lucky was not the word he would have chosen, but he accepted it. By evening, Lucas made his decision. He did not fight the demand openly. He contacted Cole and agreed to the temporary transfer, under protest, documented carefully. He requested veterinary records and access. He insisted on terms. Some were granted, some were not. It was enough. He prepared the dogs quietly. Ranger watched every movement, eyes intent, accepting what he did not yet understand. The injured K9 remained still, trusting hands that had not failed him. At the estate, preparations were already underway. Security schedules adjusted, camera coverage refined, the narrative solidified. Halston moved through the day untouched, confident in the machinery working on his behalf. Emily watched it all with new eyes. She stood at the top of the stairs that evening, looking down into the hall where voices moved and plans were confirmed. She felt fear, sharp and real. But beneath it was something steadier. Resolve. Silence had protected her for years. It would not protect anyone tonight. Outside, Lucas loaded the car. The town moved around him, indifferent. He closed the door gently, one hand resting briefly against the window. He did not know how this would end. He only knew that the truth was being edited, and that if he wanted it restored, he would need more than strength. He would need proof. Lucas did not fight in public. He answered with paper. His objection was filed cleanly, stripped of emotion, anchored by dates, signatures, and conditions. He requested access, documented refusal, and stated ownership without raising his voice. The replies came back polite and narrow. That was expected. Polite language was how power stalled for time. He prepared instead. The kitchen table returned to its old purpose, tools laid out, phone charged. A palm-sized camera sat near his hand, dull black, unremarkable. It recorded locally and uploaded automatically when signal appeared. Lucas tested it twice, then again. The light blinked once and went dark. Ready. Ranger watched from a few feet away, 5 years old, black and tan, steady build, calm eyes. He did not pace or whine. He waited. When Lucas lifted the collar, Ranger stepped forward without instruction. Trust required no explanation. Lucas opened the stitching carefully, slid the camera into place, aligned the lens outward, sealed the thread flat. When finished, the collar looked unchanged, worn, familiar. He fastened it and checked the feed on his phone. The image stabilized immediately. Ranger shifted once, then sat. The camera held. A second device followed, smaller. A transmitter clipped beneath the collar, programmed to alert Lucas the moment the camera activated. One soft pulse of blue, then nothing. Invisible. The injured K9 rested nearby on clean blankets, older, gray at the muzzle, bandage firm along his side. His breathing was slower now, measured. When Lucas knelt, the dog opened his eyes briefly and closed them again. Trust without question. Lucas adjusted the blanket and moved on. Across town, Emily Carter began counting. She did not write. She memorized. Schedules first, when the backgrounds were used. Who authorized access, which cameras were active, and which went dark at the same intervals. Patterns formed quickly once she stopped pretending they were coincidences. Emily moved through the estate as she always had, tall, controlled, hair pinned tight, expression neutral. Staff followed her instructions without question because she gave them clearly and without spectacle. That trust mattered now. She asked questions that sounded logistical. Who covered which corridor? Who rotated security after events? Who had been reassigned unexpectedly? Answers came cautiously. A gardener with a stiff leg mentioned being moved indoors on certain nights. A housekeeper said she avoided the outbuilding without knowing why. Emily listened. She remembered. Sarah Whitmore noticed immediately. Sarah had noticed everything for years. Tall, spare, iron-gray hair pinned neatly. She survived by being unremarkable and precise. Once, long ago, she had intervened. The cost had taught her restraint better than any rulebook. When Emily's questions circled the spaces Sarah avoided, She understood the risk. They spoke briefly in a service corridor where voices stayed low. Sarah did not dramatize. She listed what she knew: names, times, absences. She spoke of the night she stopped stepping in, not because she had stopped caring, but because caring had nearly ended her livelihood. Emily listened without interruption. Then she asked one question. If the time came, would Sarah speak? Sarah paused, then nodded once. Lucas packed methodically. Documents first, copies separated by date. Phone backed up, charger secured. He tested the camera upload until it triggered cleanly. The alert pinged his phone. He shut it off. Satisfied. The veterinarian called. The wound was healing. No complications. Lucas thanked her and ended the call. Lucky was the word she used. Lucas did not repeat it. Emily finalized her list, not on paper, in order of reliability. Staff who had seen more than they admitted, contractors who had asked to be reassigned, guests who had left unsettled. She prioritized memory over courage. Truth would need both, but memory came first. Security schedules shifted at the estate. New equipment arrived quietly. The outbuilding was cleaned until it looked unused. The tone returned to normal. Emily recognized the performance. She had helped maintain it for years. Now she watched for cracks. Lucas fed both dogs. Ranger ate first, then stepped back. The injured K9 approached slowly. No tension, just patience. Lucas watched for a moment, then turned away. Preparation did not allow sentiment to linger. That night, Emily stood at the top of the stairs, listening to plans being finalized below. Her fear sharpened, then steadied. Silence had protected her once. It would not protect anyone now. Lucas finished packing near midnight. He fastened Ranger's collar and checked the seal one last time. The transmitter pulsed once. Ready. He lay down beside the injured K9, one hand resting briefly against the dog's shoulder. Breath, warmth, proof that not everything could be edited. The quiet had done its work. The estate opened itself again the following night without apology. Gates parted on schedule. Lights came on where they always did. The backgrounds were prepared with the same efficiency, the same quiet confidence. To those inside the house, it felt like continuity. To those who understood patterns, it felt like repetition. Richard Halston moved through the evening with renewed certainty. He wore a dark jacket tailored close to his frame, his silver hair combed back neatly, his expression calm and assured. The interruption from the night before had been reframed into an inconvenience, an anomaly corrected by procedure. He believed in process. He believed that once a narrative settled, it became fact. Tonight he intended to demonstrate control again, not loudly, not publicly, but clearly enough for those who mattered. Behind the mansion, the outbuilding waited. The ground had been cleaned. New equipment rested nearby, polished and functional. The wooden frame stood upright, sturdier than before. Ropes lay coiled, thicker, cleaner. The space looked orderly, prepared, stripped of anything that might suggest uncertainty. The first dog was brought out without ceremony. He was the injured K9, older, gray beginning to creep along his muzzle, the bandage still visible beneath thinning fur. His steps were careful, measured. He did not resist. He had learned what resistance cost. His amber eyes moved slowly, cataloging the space with the dull awareness of something that no longer expected help. Then the second dog appeared. Ranger was led forward by a handler he did not know. The German shepherd's body was tense but controlled, 5 years old, black and tan, built for endurance rather than intimidation. His eyes were clear, alert, taking in everything. He did not bark. He did not pull. He watched. The handler, a man in his 30s with a rigid posture and a practiced blank expression, avoided Ranger's gaze. He did his job quickly. The dogs were secured side by side. The symmetry pleased Halston. He stood back, hands relaxed at his sides, studying the scene as if it were a diagram. He spoke then, not to the dogs, but to the small group gathered behind him. Guests, staff, security. Fewer than the night before, but enough. He did not lower his voice. He had no reason to. He talked about order, about discipline, about how systems failed when weakness was allowed to interrupt them. He spoke of training as a language animals understood better than kindness. He spoke of fear as a tool, not a flaw. Each sentence landed easily, practiced over years of justification. He believed what he said. That belief gave his words weight. From the edge of the grounds, Emily Carter watched. She stood near a service path, posture straight, her dark blonde hair pulled back tightly, her expression neutral by habit. Years of managing the house had taught her how to exist without drawing attention. Tonight she used that invisibility deliberately. Her phone rested in her hand, screen dark. She waited. Timing mattered more than courage. Sarah Whitmore stood closer to the wall, tall and spare, iron-gray hair pinned neatly. Her face was pale, her mouth set in a thin line. She had positioned herself where she could see both the frame and the people watching it. She did not look at the dogs for long. She had learned how quickly looking could become unbearable. She focused instead on the faces around her, who flinched, who smiled, who looked away. Halston reached for the bow. The moment his fingers closed around it, the small device sewn into Ranger's collar activated. The camera began recording locally, silently. No lights, no sound, just capture. The transmitter pulsed once beneath the collar, unnoticed by everyone except the phone in Emily's hand. Her screen lit, the feed stabilized. Emily did not react. She let the camera run as Halston continued speaking. She let him explain himself, let him define his world in his own words. When he raised the bow slightly and spoke again about obedience, about consequences, she made her move. Her thumb tapped the screen once. The feed began to upload. The link was shared to the town group she had memorized, the one that gathered information faster than any official channel. No announcement, no caption, just truth delivered raw. Across the estate, Lucas moved. He had entered through the side path, unchallenged, his timing precise. He wore dark clothing, practical, nothing that drew attention. His posture was relaxed, but his focus was sharp. Years of training had taught him how to cross spaces without being noticed until it mattered. Ranger's absence was a weight he felt with every step. He followed the sound of Halston's voice. When Lucas stepped into the lantern light, the space shifted. He did not shout. He did not run. He placed himself squarely between the raised bow and the two restrained dogs, feet planted, shoulders open. His presence was immediate and undeniable. He was not tall in a way that demanded attention, but there was density to him, a compact certainty that altered the room. He lifted one hand, palm open, not in surrender, but in boundary. Halston stopped speaking. For a fraction of a second, confusion crossed his face. Then recognition. Then irritation. He smiled thinly, the expression of someone humoring a nuisance. He addressed Lucas as though addressing a child who had wandered into the wrong room. He warned him about trespassing, about consequences, about restraint. Lucas did not respond. He stood still. He let the camera see everything: the bow, the dogs, the ropes, the man holding power, and the man refusing to move. He knew better than to interrupt a confession. Silence was leverage. Behind him, the dogs strained slightly, bodies trembling. Ranger turned his head just enough to touch the injured canine's shoulder with his muzzle, a brief contact, steady and deliberate. The older dog leaned into it, breath hitching, then steadied. The camera caught it all. Halston laughed softly. He spoke again, louder this time, performing for the attention he believed he still commanded. He talked about property, about ownership, about the necessity of examples. He did not realize how much he was revealing. He had never needed to filter himself before. Authority had always protected him. Emily watched the comments begin to appear. Confusion first, then anger, then recognition. Names appeared, addresses. People asked if this was the same house on the hill. Someone posted a still image. Another shared the link again. The feed spread beyond the group Emily had targeted. She felt her pulse quicken, then settle. This was no longer hers to control. That was the point. Sarah stepped forward one pace. Her voice did not shake when she spoke. It surprised her. She did not accuse. She did not argue. She said simply that people were watching. The words landed differently now. Halston glanced toward her, irritation flickering into something else. Doubt. Lucas felt the bow angle shift. He did not move. He raised his phone slightly, just enough for the camera's reflection to catch in the lantern light. The red indicator glowed faintly. Live. Halston saw it. For the first time that night, he hesitated. Not long, just enough. The moment stretched. The dogs breathed. The crowd watched. Hundreds of eyes beyond the gates leaned in. The truth was speaking. Sirens arrived after the words had already done their damage. They cut through the estate gates in pairs, lights slicing across stone and hedges, sound filling the spaces that moments earlier had belonged to control. By the time officers stepped into the backgrounds, the camera feed had captured everything it needed. The bow, the ropes, the explanations that were never meant to leave the hill. Halston stood where he was, posture stiff, expression caught between disbelief and offense. He attempted to speak, then stopped when an officer raised a hand. The lead officer was a woman in her 40s, with cropped hair and a calm, practiced demeanor. Her uniform was neat, her movements precise. She asked for the weapon. She asked for distance. She asked for silence. Authority shifted without ceremony. Emily Carter stepped forward first. She did not rush. She did not tremble. She identified herself clearly, voice steady, words simple. She stated what she had witnessed. She stated when. She stated where the cameras had been turned off on previous nights. She did not speculate. She testified. Sarah Whitmore followed. Tall, spare, iron-gray hair pinned tight. Her voice was quiet but unwavering. She spoke in lists, dates, patterns, names. She described what she had seen over years, not one incident, but many. She described the cost of speaking earlier and why she had waited. The officer listened without interruption. Others found their voices once the first silence broke. A groundskeeper with a limp described reassignment orders. A housekeeper described corridors she had been told to avoid. A security contractor admitted instructions that had never been written down. Each statement layered onto the last. The truth assembled itself without argument. Halston tried to interrupt. He cited property. He cited provocation. He cited misunderstanding. The words sounded thin now, stripped of context and protection. An officer placed him in handcuffs. The metal closed with a final, practical click. For the first time that night, the hill did not look down on the town. It was being watched. The dogs were freed carefully. Rangers surged forward the moment the ropes loosened, not in aggression, but in certainty. He pressed his body against the injured K9, anchoring him until his legs steadied. Lucas knelt beside them, hands gentle, voice low. He did not look at Halston. He did not need to. The moment had already passed. The feed ended on its own when the battery dipped below threshold. It did not matter. Copies were already everywhere. The following weeks moved quickly. Charges were filed, statements were recorded, motions were denied. The estate gates stayed closed. The mansion stood empty, its windows dark, its presence finally quiet. A notice appeared at the edge of the drive. Condemned pending investigation. The hill became a landmark again, rather than a warning. Lucas's life did not reset overnight. It reorganized. Charges against him dissolved quietly, without apology. His job did not return. Something else took its place. Donations arrived in small amounts and large ones, some with notes, some anonymous. A veterinarian offered services at cost. A lawyer offered time without invoice. The town did not ask Lucas to be a hero. It asked him to build something useful. He did. The center opened in a renovated warehouse near the edge of town, plain and sturdy. No sign carried his name. Inside were clean runs, soft bedding, and space designed for recovery rather than display. The first dogs arrived cautiously. Some limped, some flinched. All were treated as if dignity were a habit to be relearned. Ranger learned the routine quickly. 5 years old, steady, patient. He greeted newcomers without pressure, offering presence rather than dominance. The injured canine healed slowly, the scar along his side tightening into a line that marked survival rather than loss. He took his first unassisted steps across the concrete floor with careful pride. No one rushed him. Emily volunteered from the start. She handled schedules again, but this time they served care rather than concealment. Her posture loosened. Her voice softened. She laughed once, surprised by the sound. Sarah visited on Saturdays, hands folded as always, eyes lighter than they had been in years. She brought biscuits. She stayed long enough to watch the dogs settle. Months passed. The hill remained sealed. Grass grew along the drive. The mansion stopped being mentioned. In the afternoons, the center filled with sound, not cries, not alarms, barking, conversation, the rhythm of lives relearning safety. Lucas stood at the fence some evenings, Ranger at his side, watching movement replace stillness. He did not feel like a savior. He felt like a custodian holding a door open. When the dogs barked now, it was not a warning. It was a greeting. The town heard it clearly, and this time the sound stayed where it belonged. The Bible teaches us that God often works through human hands, through those who listen when others stay silent, through those who act when fear says, "Stay back." The miracle here was not only that the dogs were saved. The miracle was that hearts were changed. Silence was broken. Darkness was exposed not by force, but by truth. In our daily lives, we may never face bows or chains or public cruelty, but we face moments that test us all the same. Moments when we hear a cry for help. Moments when staying quiet feels easier. Moments when speaking up feels risky. Faith is not proven in comfort. Faith is proven in choice. If this story moved you, let it move you forward. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. Speak when silence would harm. Choose courage over convenience. Share this story so its light can reach someone else who needs it today. Please leave a comment with Amen if you believe that compassion still matters, that truth still has power, and that God still works through ordinary people. Subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can be shared. And may God bless you, your family, and all those who choose to stand on the side of mercy and love.